Hello, and welcome back to another video on the Ants USA Ant channel, where today I will be showing you how I added a team of scavengers to my Carpenter ants hunting grounds, as well as a new scarce of sugar, and their reaction to these new events. But before we get into all of that, I would like to ask you guys to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. So without further ado, let's get into the video. This is what my Carpenter ant colony's Outworld, or foraging area, used to look like a few weeks ago. But this is how it looks now. As you can see, the plants have unfortunately all died, probably due to there not being enough soil for them to grow in. Meanwhile, the ants are enjoying a piece of beetle jelly, along with a strawberry and their liquid feeder. Now, upon looking into the nest, we can clearly see that the colony is doing well. There is a lot more brood than there was in the last video, which you can check out in the info card in the top right corner of this one. As you can see, the colony has a pretty big margin in brood size, as there are only pupae, medium larvae, and small larvae that are all the same size. This is because unlike the queens of most ant species, Carpenter ant queens lay eggs in batches, as opposed to around the clock. Another thing I forgot to address in the last video on this colony is that, as you can see here, they have started producing majors, which are the big ants with the larger heads. These don't come out of the nest much and are simply used as repletes, or a caste of worker ant that stores food for the colony to consume during harder times. Another cool thing to see was that the larvae were filled with food. So in short, the colony was doing well, but the same could not be said for their Outworld, which was becoming dirtier and dirtier every day from the colony's garbage. As mentioned earlier, the plants were all dead, and there was mold growing everywhere in the wet areas of the Outworld. Now, here is where these guys come in. This is a small colony of Porcellanides florea isopods. They will be part of the cleanup crew made up of scavengers I will be adding in today to clean up the Carpenter ants Outworld. These isopods eat all kinds of detritus, including the leftovers of strawberry and superworms that I feed the ants. So without further ado, let's add them in. As the ants were devouring a piece of beetle jelly, I added in the first isopod, who immediately took cover in the rocks of this unknown space. After I added a few more of them, the ants started to take notice and began chasing one of the isopods around. This assault was short-lived, however, as the isopod successfully escaped its attacker and took refuge in the rocks like many of its fellow comrades. As I watched the isopods exploring their new home, I witnessed one of them come close to the ant's strawberry, but immediately losing interest after detecting the ant's presence. After seeing this, it is easy to deduce that there will be a sort of hierarchy in this system, where the isopods will only feed on the colony's leftovers instead of competing with them for food. Such a relationship between these two sets of organisms is expected, as ants are often at the top of the invertebrate food chain in almost any given terrestrial ecosystem. As can be seen here, the isopods will likely hide out during the day in the damp corners of the Outworld, and come out to feed on the colony's leftovers during nighttime. This isopod can be seen eating some mold growing on a piece of artificial moss. Even though this would help with the mold outbreak, just the isopods by themselves wouldn't be enough, as their diet consists mainly of dead organisms, and is only supplemented by mold. That is why I will now be adding in these guys. This is a colony of springtails, of the order Collembola, and mold makes up a very large portion of their diet, which for our purposes here, is perfect. In fact, these springtails are one of, if not the most commonly used detritivores for terrarium cleanup, due to their hardy nature, fast reproduction rate, and ability to consume almost any biological waste produced by the main inhabitants of the setup they are introduced into. I put them in along with the dirt, because as you may be able to deduce, picking them out one by one would be almost impossible. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to all of this, the ants were still focused on eating their beetle jelly, which I have recently found to be their favorite food. Here you can see the springtails already establishing their presence, as one of them runs right past the ants. One of the ants seems to notice, as she begins to look for the trespasser. But in the end fails, as springtails are simply too small for the ants to catch. Not long after, one of the isopods musters up the courage to come out and feed on a leftover superworm carcass that I usually would have to simply remove from the Outworld, due to there previously being no cleanup crew to eat the colony's scraps. After I added in the owl containing the springtails, I came to realize that this could mean better growing conditions for plants, so I decided to make another attempt at growing plants in the Outworld. If you watched the last video on this colony, you may know that one of the Outworld's connection ports is not being used for anything, so I decided to use it to give the colony access to a constant supply of sugar water, which can be made by mixing honey with water in a test tube with a bamboo skewer, which is followed by inserting a piece of cotton, just like any ordinary test tube setup. I then connected it to the Outworld. Done! The colony now had an almost endless supply of sugar, which I would simply have to refill once every few weeks. Here you can see that it is not very far from the colony's usual feeding grounds. I would still have to get them to come closer to it so that they could easily discover it, so I placed down another piece of beetle jelly closer to the connection port, to make it easier for the ants to find it, who at this point were not very far away from it. Not long after, a worker found its way in, and brought back another who was foraging nearby. The two ants began to lick up the honey residue on the sides of the test tube, as the first worker went to share this news with the rest of the colony. I knew that this new food source was an immediate hit with the colony, as more and more of the workers were coming in to fill their social stomachs to pass the honey on to the rest of the colony. After only a few minutes, there was a solid trail of ants going through the connection tube to feed on the honey. Here we can observe a process known as trophallaxis, which is when one ant transfers food to another via their social stomachs. The workers will be using this method to distribute food to all members of the colony, including the queen and brood. As we are now nearing the end of the video, I would like to thank all those still watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this one.